What do you think about, there's this distinction between causal and acausal magic, or like sort of magic that has a point. I'm going to do a spell to cause an effect. And this other kind of magic, which is I'm just going to open myself to it, work with it. I'm like a fish trying to breathe the air. I'm trying to become an inhabitant of a new type of world, and that world has possibilities and maybe even nutrients in it that are necessary for me, but I'm not thinking of it as this is going to cause this particular effect. How do you balance open-ended and strategic approaches to magic?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't balance them. I can answer this from a personal place, and then I can answer this from a more theoretical place. But I'll start with the personal. And so, for myself, I've typically traditionally practiced the open-ended and acausal, as in, observing thoughts, observing synchronicity, creating meaning from those synchronicities, and allowing myself to exist within mystery. Now, that is one way of approaching it, and that way is perfectly valid. But I think what's really interesting and a little controversial that we want to play with and touch on here in this course is it possible to, enact magical will upon reality, to change reality? And I think there's a degree of truth to that if you are willing to be a little bit open about how you understand things like cause and effect. So cause and effect as a hermetic principle, and I'd love, to hear more from you about how the hermetic principles and magic play into this course, and also in your personal everyday occult practice. One of the hermetic principles is cause and effect, and it does kind of their way of viewing cause and effect sort of doesn't see cause as the, you know, necessarily the commander of the effect, because how things can be caused, and how we experience things as being caused is a little bit open-ended when you really kind of pick apart how does time work, how does experience work. Things can appear to be caused by certain things, and we can be wrong about that, and apophenia plays a role into that. And so I think if we think about causing things magically as being open to what is already happening, and just sort of experiencing our agency around those things. I'll give an example of when people use affirmations as a magical practice, telling themselves that they will experience a certain thing. They are priming themselves to be able to be open to environments in which that experience is more likely to occur. And so that is both open-ended in the sense that those kinds of experiences could happen anywhere and at any time, and they are well, they're acausal in the sense that they're happening all the time everywhere, and they're causal in the sense that you are enforcing your will upon yourself as you act in reality to experience these things, or to experience them more frequently, or to be more likely to experience them. I also kind of want to speak to this idea that if it doesn't happen and if it doesn't work, then it's somehow flawed. Because a lot of things that are based in science or in physics or in this more practical understanding of reality all do fail. A lot of things just don't work, even if we do them the right way. And so, can we sort of extend that grace to the magical? I think we have unrealistic expectations for how magic actually works. I think it's like anything else in which failure is absolutely an option. It just might be a little bit more difficult to mitigate those failures due to the amount of mystery inherent in magical practice. And so I think we ultimately, to actually answer your question rather than to continue rambling, I think both. I think we need to allow space for the magic itself to have agency. Even as we're trying to get specific things or make specific things happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the obvious thing to do is to problematize the distinction between those two approaches, and I appreciate uh, the acausal approach to causality itself does a good job of problematizing that distinction. And there's a lot of models of physics, and there's some interesting metaphysical approaches to life that, um, let's say, remove the ordinary linear notion of the relationship between cause and effect. We know that cause and effect go together, but that doesn't mean they go together on a straight line. They might go together in a more omnidirectional sense.
Mhm.
When I try to give a pragmatic definition of magic, like I was saying before, I think of it as energized enthusiasm and semantic implication working together. But working together to do what? To skew coincidence somehow, to skew the
Mhm.
experience of coincidence, both in a receptive and a proactive mode. What does that actually mean in terms of the ordinary worldview? Well, you certainly can skew your perceptual and interpretive mechanisms, right? You train ourselves to pick up different lines of data, which lead to different types of outcome. We can communicate with our subconscious, and if it has access to types of pattern processing and types of action that fall outside of the conscious mind's jurisdiction, then that can, in a very straightforward way, dramatically increase the odds that certain outcomes will occur. I think we're in very sketchy territory when we start to invoke quantum mechanics and psionic studies and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, it doesn't seem like there's nothing there from a scientific point of view, but it also
Mhm.
seems crazed and exaggerated every time you go near it. And I think that's means that we should go near it as well. That's one of the monstrous elements of this. When you meet somebody who is just absolutely convinced that the data is in, we've locked down the fact that new physics means this is all true and you can control reality with your mind, there's a monstrosity to that. There's a grotesque thing that's gone on in that person. And
Mhm.
we should be intrigued enough to want to touch that thing, but without becoming absorbed into it.
Mhm.
I've had a lot of success in seemingly skewing coincidental outcomes. But I'm very cautious around that because there are modes of feeling like I'm the determiner that I find to be unpleasant. That my general well being and ease and ability to be in flow can be harmed by my attempts to manipulate the world in very esoteric ways and in very banal ways. The game of being the determiner of your own and other people's experience is not a very rewarding game. So mostly what I'm interested in is the more open-ended acausal approach, where I think of it as being, like I mentioned before, a kind of new terrain, a kind of new atmosphere that we have to learn to breathe, a place that's inhabited by sort of formally unintelligible forces, forces that fall outside of our normal neuropsychological computational capacity to compress patterns into things that make sense. But then how do we deal with patterns that fall outside of that sphere? They're going to necessarily appear as weird, as unintelligible, and incomprehensible. That doesn't mean we have no ability to work with them, but we need to undertake um, experiments in communities of practice around trying to speak the language of computational irreducibility in an existential way. Like, how do I receive messages from what I cannot understand? And how do I speak back to the part of the world that I cannot understand? How can I become a participant in the realm that coincidence points toward? And I think that's the more interesting thing for me personally. Sometimes when I say exagic instead of magic, that's what I mean is the general need of human beings to start to grow into the acausal domain. And I think that's essential because there's been a lot of time in which our civilization has marginalized our capacity to explore these domains under so called left brain dominance. I think we need to gain capacity very quickly now at this point in history to survive and thrive in the weirdness of acausal states. If they exist and they impinge upon us, and if they seem to characterize a lot of the even very dark and unpleasant things we see in the world, we've got to get much better at the competencies involved in inhabiting a world of hyperpeculiarity and nonlinear pattern making. I also think that the practices involved in that more acausal approach also double as fundamental spiritual and self-developmental practices. They grow our being, they grow our will in a more benign way, they grow our attention, and they intensify the participatory charm of being. So I see a lot of reasons why it's really important to put a lot more effort into becoming voluntary participants in the acausal domain.